Hi everyone, welcome back to Program Evaluation and Outcomes Management. We're in week 3 of our course, and today we're going to take a look at program theory. We're going to start to set a strong foundation for our evaluative model. Last week we started with the basics. We defined what a social program is, what it means to design and execute an evaluation of a social program, and we walked through an overview of the processes, scopes, and purposes of different types of evaluations. We introduced our stakeholders, who they are, why they're important to any evaluations, and why they should be engaged. We spoke to the target populations and looked briefly at how and why we specify them. Recall also, we discussed the assumption of a causal relationship between an intervention and a predicted change in a social need that is inherent to social programs. In the second portion of last week's class, we took a deeper dive into needs assessments, getting into more of the specifics as the ideal first stage of an evaluation process, where you identify the gap between what is and what should be, and how this lens can contribute to the identification of a need area for a program to be introduced to meet. If you recall, after the needs assessment comes the program design and theory upon which it is based. I call this the nuts and bolts of a program, and this is where our focus will be for this week. We're going to examine how an evaluation can assess the quality of program conceptualization, also referred to as the program theory. I just want to take a moment and situate ourselves. Last week, we did talk about the needs assessment. Remember, this is before a program is even launched, or perhaps even before a program is identified, because we're at that point identifying the gap that we need to try to fill. Now we're moving on to program design and theory evaluation. That's a second domain of program evaluation, and that's where we're going to rest today. You'll notice I've kind of built us a linear process here where we would go from step 1, a needs assessment, to program design and theory evaluation, followed by process and implementation evaluations, followed by impact evaluations, and finally, rounding out the 5, the cost efficiency assessments. Take a look at the bottom of this. It situates it in terms of where the program is. So is the assessment done before the program, during the program's operation or implementation, or is it taken afterwards? Note that this really isn't a linear process in real life. I'm making it a little bit simple as we start to dig into things. You'll see me build on this as we go, loop back and kind of show where one evaluation can actually inform a previous evaluation and so on. Just stick with me. Right now, I just want you to kind of have a feel for where we are in relation to the various types of evaluations we're going to be discussing and where those are appropriate to use in relation to a potential program. Program design and theory reflects the foundations upon which the program is built. Theories of change are reflected. If we introduce a specific intervention in our program, deliver it to our target population in specified ways, why do we expect that it will have an impact? It's best practice to establish the objectives for the program and how to achieve those objectives clearly and concretely when planning a program. Yet, this is often an oversight, which can have lasting impact not only for the evaluator, but also for the program's overall effectiveness. There will be times where this may not be possible, of course, but it's something to prioritize when appropriate. Often programs run on theoretical assumptions that are so common throughout the program offerings that we're almost unaware of it. An example of this is the idea of the exposure to information. The idea is that if we give the target population more information, if we educate them, it will increase their capacity to seek solutions to meet their needs. It's a very common sense approach that many of us will have seen with programs targeting substance abuse, teen pregnancy, or even lock it or lose it programs to reduce thefts from property, homes, or cars. However, there is a body of evidence showing that this theory of change may not be as effective as we'd expect. Yet programs based on this theory continue to be created and implemented because sometimes no one stopped to reflect on why we think the program will do what we expect it to do, and whether or not this has demonstrated measured success in the past. Perhaps unsurprisingly, it will often fall to the evaluator to identify what the aim of the program is and what the accompanying theory is. Stakeholders may have a vague viewpoint, or there may not be consensus among them about this. The more implicit it is, the more the evaluator may have to dig a bit to be able to explicitly articulate what the underlying theory is. Pausing to critically examine the underlying theories and assumptions of programs are thus warranted, leading us into our look at program design and theory evaluation, where we are going to first look at identifying and explicitly conceptualizing the program theory, and secondly, assessing the quality of that theory. Sometimes, before you ever get to the evaluation of a need-responding program, you as an evaluator may face the challenge of even designing the evaluation. Unforeseen barriers, lack of resources, stakeholder disagreements over purposes, goals, and objectives can almost ground an evaluation before it ever takes off. So what did the evaluation community do to rectify this? It started to evaluate the evaluability of a program. Essentially, we're going to find out whether or not, we're going to gauge whether or not a program is constructed in a way that sets it up to be further evaluated. The evaluability assessment has three primary goals. The first is to describe the program model. Here we're looking at the program's goals and objectives. The second goal is to assess how well the model will be able to be evaluated. So we need to look down the road and make sure that we're setting the program up from the beginning to enable us to evaluate it later. And thirdly, looking at the stakeholders' interest in further evaluation and the purposes for which they may need to use the evaluation findings. The evaluability assessment is primarily a qualitative assessment of whether the minimum conditions are met for an evaluation to go forward. It is questioning whether we have the information needed to complete the evaluation and could include questions about determining whether human and financial resources are adequate, examining stakeholder buy-in and support, finding points of stakeholder agreement or points of stakeholder disagreement, asking whether or not the connections were made regarding how the program is expected to meet its goals, and more. The logic or rationale behind an evaluability assessment allows for a pathway to determine whether or not a program is ready to be evaluated. It's more complex than a checklist, but at its root, it's attempting to check off that key information, persons, and resources to make sure it's sufficiently developed and available to enable an evaluation down the road. I like baking. Humor me here. It's one of my little amateur hobbies. I think because it's methodical, highly specified, and clearly a process-based endeavor. So sometimes I look at the evaluability Assessment as the same process I do before I attempt a recipe. Do I have the ingredients? Do I have enough of each? Do we have the steps clearly articulated in the order they need to occur? Take a look at the diagram I borrowed from your textbook here from page 62. This is essentially taking a look to make sure you're set up properly to execute what you need to be able to do down the road. You need to have all your instructions and all your ingredients that are going to add up to an evaluation down the road. So for example, we're going to start looking at involving the users of the evaluation. We need to determine the scope of the project. From there, we'll want to review program documents, consult stakeholders. From there, we'll have a sense for whether or not the program documents, the stakeholders, everybody involved agrees on the same goals for the program. And here's where you start to reach your yes, no's, continue, don't continue, red light, green light moments. If people don't agree on the goals, it's time to stop, it's time to backtrack, it's time to modify and fix some things. If they do agree on the goals, then you can move forward and you can start to create that logic model or theory of change that we discussed last week, where if we offer such and such interventions, we expect to see such and such change in behavior or attitudes or social conditions. From there, again, we're going to consult our stakeholders. Do they agree on the model? Does it resonate with them? Have we departed from the true intention or from the true purpose and the true change process that they expected? If there is no agreement, again, we're going to pause, we're going to stop, we're going to reevaluate and possibly revise that whole program. If they do agree, then we can move on. We can start to look at interviewing staff, scouting out the program's reality, and getting a feel for whether or not this program is still ready to launch. At the end of that, you can report on the assessment of plausibility, areas for program development, that can be strengths and weaknesses, the evaluation of the feasibility of the program, options for further evaluation, critiques of data, and so on. This, as you notice, there's a few little spirals in there. There's a bit of a feedback loop here where the results from the evaluability assessment can go back to fine-tune the program, and from there, the evaluability assessment can pick up again until we know that we have a strong, defined program that's ready to go. The evaluability assessment is asking questions such as, is there agreement on goals and objectives of the program? Has the logic been described in sufficient detail? Is it plausible that the program can actually accomplish what it's intending to do? Is there agreement among our stakeholders about the performance criteria or how to measure that program effectiveness? Can the program or evaluation sponsor afford it? Sometimes we can come up with a beautiful program, but it might break the bank, and that's where it might get shut down. And finally, do the key stakeholders agree on the relevance of a program evaluation? It's good to know if they're expecting to see an evaluation down the road so that you as the evaluator can continue to contribute and voice what you'll need to move forward on that. The evaluability assessment results ultimately point to whether the program is ready to be further evaluated or whether there's fundamental foundational issues with the program process or the theory underlying it. This is also the stage where the evaluator looks at what exists and what is needed in order to be able to complete an exhaustive evaluation. One often overlooked piece is baseline data to compare future outcomes against, or policies and procedures to ensure program fidelity. These are the wheelhouse of the evaluator. So your stakeholders may not be thinking with that same lens on. They might be looking at it in terms of getting the program out as fast as they can to help people as quickly as they can. Or they might be concerned with securing the funding. And all of these are relevant pieces to that program implementation, that rollout. But the evaluator needs to remember to voice and to try to shape the program structure and the processes around it so that they will have the data and the documentation and the access to the program down the road to fulfill the evaluation, especially if the stakeholders have already specified that they do want that. While to this point we've focused on the program's design logic and theory, the evaluability assessment can and should often look at the program's underlying theory as well. So let's just take a moment and think about theory. Recall from earlier, a program's theory articulates why a program does what it does and why we can expect that this process will achieve specified outcomes. I kind of want to set us up to understand the interrelated concepts that can basically work together to form what we call program theory. You can look at program theory as having two primary branches. The first being the impact theory, which is our theory about how our interventions will bring about change. And then secondly, the process theory, which describes those nuts and bolts pieces, the resources needed, the dosage if applicable, the method of intervention, the position of the program in the organization, the education and training of the program facilitators or the staff members that are supporting the program. It's all of those kind of logistical, mechanical pieces that are necessary to ensure that a program can run. Without them, you can have the best theory of change that you want, but you also need your theory of action about how you're actually going to be able to make this come about. So let's spend some time describing program theory and especially focusing on the impact theory portion of that. If you reference the preceding slide, one branch of program theory is the impact theory. It's also referred to often as the theory of change, which I really like because it really helps me remember which one we're referring to. And the theory of change consists of assumptions about the change process actuated by the program and the outcomes that are expected to be affected as a result. It specifies how an intended intervention for the specified target population brings about the desired social, economic, or environmental benefits. In most cases, programs target changes in an individual's behavior directly or indirectly as well. There are multiple terms that are used in the evaluation community to kind of get at this theory of change or to depict this impact theory. Some of them include logic model, program model, outcome line, cause map. All of these seek to encapsulate a similar assumption that actions taken by a program are intended to produce an outcome and that every transaction between a program's delivery and its target population is meant to be purposeful for bringing about change. So that's where I want you to start thinking about the services offered in relation to the target population members. Every time they interact with the program, there is a transaction that takes place, whether it's the exchange of knowledge, the exchange of shared experience, the exchange of goods or funding even. There is a transaction there between the individuals and the program and the individuals. What we want to see is that the theory of change is a foundational element from the beginning that roots every interaction and tactic that's going to be used with the target population. The assumptions in the theory of change can be simple. It can be as simple as, if I see more police on the road, I'm probably going to be deterred from driving dangerously. Or it can be far more sophisticated and complex, articulating a chain of events based on the social and psychological theories of behavior and social patterns. Evaluators will always be looking to establish a causal relationship. At its simplest, they want to know if X intervention or program or treatment leads to a change in Y. Rarely is this so directly achieved. There are many factors that evaluators do not have control over, and we've alluded to that earlier in the course. More often, they will target a critical and yet manageable aspect of a situation with the expectation that this will lead to far-reaching improvements. So if we identify a strategic target and tackle bringing about change in that social reality or that social target, that will contribute to the overall far-reaching improvements. Often, there will be several steps along this path between the program intervention and that beneficial outcome. It may not be as simple always as put more police cars on the road to reduce dangerous driving. It may be a sequence of events that is designed to bring about that change. So for example, health promotion teams at a local health unit may increase informational sessions on healthy eating choices for those at risk or experiencing diabetes, which may, in turn, increase the knowledge of better eating choices. To coincide with this, they may also introduce a low-cost grocery delivery program that's subsidized by public funds, which those who are facing barriers to implementing those needed changes to their diet may qualify for. For example, low-income households, seniors on fixed incomes, those with mobility barriers inhibiting grocery shopping, etc. These multifaceted interventions may be supplemented by a hotline to support those persons attempting to execute their new healthy eating plans, to support them with more information or resources that they might need. This is a multifaceted approach where multiple interventions are connected with the ultimate aim of reducing new incidents of diabetes and managing those who are already diagnosed, thus improving healthcare indicators and potentially reducing those who would have needed to use healthcare services more acutely to manage their disease. Ultimately, achieving the intended change through a sound, replicable process is considered a sign of success. Even within outcomes, those that are more long-lasting, so we call those distal outcomes, are weighted more favorably than those short-term quick wins, which, while encouraging and positive, and we like to see, often do not last. So the more that our theory of change can bring about those long-term, those distal outcomes, the more sound it is, because that's what we're aiming for. We want to see quick, good, positive outcomes quickly if we can, but long-term, if these changes last and bring about long-term positive change, that's probably even more highly desired. I want you to refer back a few slides to the little diagram that we looked at for program theory. And you'll recall that not only does program theory include the impact theory, but it also includes the process theory. Process theory is concerned with whether the program is well situated to actually provide the services to the target population. This makes sense. It makes good sense as the theory behind a program can be exceptional, but it's fairly useless unless the program can be effectively delivered to the population. Evaluators look at two areas to assess the process theory. The first is the service utilization plan, which includes the program's assumptions and expectations about how to reach the target population, provides and sequences service contacts, so when individuals will contact or be in contact with the program, and it tells it when to conclude the relationship, whenever the services are no longer needed or appropriate. In other words, it specifies how an intended target population receives the intended amount of intervention through the interaction with a program service delivery system. The key focus here is where the service and where the target population overlap or are in contact. And that's why I threw the little Venn diagram in. We have our program services that we're offering to our target population. We have our target population that needs to come into contact with those services to benefit from them. And so there's this little overlap where the service utilization plan that's what that's targeting. The service utilization plan is a detailed, customized plan designed specifically for the program's rollout. It should be explicit, detailed, and process-oriented. An explicit plan sets out how and why the recipients of a service will prove to become engaged and follow through, receiving enough of the program to initiate the change outlined by the program's impact theory. This is where the logic model starts to come in handy. A flowchart that builds this piece into it, as well as the impact theory, so that you can visualize how you're going to actually bring your target population into contact with what you're trying to offer them. For example, perhaps a grief program will provide pamphlets to local hospitals, hospices, funeral homes, and victim service organizations. The pamphlets will provide information on their intensive group session program for those who have experienced the death of a loved one. It will specify a point of contact for more information or a website. Those who volunteer to attend from the target population will attend an 8-week program consisting of 2 one-hour group sessions per week on specified dates. The program is a closed program. It will start every 8 weeks and new members cannot join until a new session begins. The program will build upon itself. So if a member misses more than one session in a row, they will be asked to start the process again. If the participant meets these requirements and completes any of the assigned work that goes along with the curriculum, they will, quote, graduate the program at the end of the 8th week. If you were listening to that, this was a brief service utilization plan, working to start to make explicit those program assumptions and expectations on how to reach the target population, sequencing the contacts or the interactions between the target population and the program itself, and then also specifying the criteria of when that program ends for members. What I just went through with the grief program is a very brief one. The detail work that would go into a real one would be more exhaustive, going into multiple nuances and what if scenarios. But it gives you an idea of what's being targeted whenever we refer to a service utilization plan. How is the target population going to use the service? The second component of the process theory is called the organizational plan, which relates to the program resources, personnel, administration, and general organization. It runs on a basic if-then process. If the program has the specified resources, facilities, staffing, etc., and if the program is administered in a specified way, and if it entails such and such activities or functions or interactions with the target population, then a viable organization will result that can operate the intended service delivery system. In other words, the organizational plan specifies how to get resources and then how to adapt them to the program and deploy them to support the organization of the program. This resource management will enable the service delivery of the program. This could include criteria surrounding the educational or training requirements for those delivering the program. It could spec out what is needed in the facilities that are going to house the program. It could refer to committees surrounding the delivery of the program or supervision and oversight requirements. When all of these necessary pieces are sufficiently present, we will likely see a viable organization that can adequately support the intended service delivery. The program's organization and the service delivery system that is supported by such organizational efforts are the part of the program most able to be controlled by the program administrator. Together, these are often referred to as program process. The program process is based on assumptions and expectations, and this, in a nutshell, is the program process theory. So again, I made us a little Venn diagram here where we're looking again at the program services. What are being offered to our target population? But instead of the target population being in contact with the program services here, we're looking at, is the organization set up in a manner to support the implementation and the delivery of the program services? Do we have the people we need? Do we have the facilities? Maybe we need a classroom, maybe we need a gymnasium. Do we have the facilities we need? Do we have the leadership roles specified that are needed? All of these organization pieces are vital to the program actually being implemented. So I just wanted to bring it all together a little bit here before we move on. But if you remember, the service utilization plan brings the program services and the target population together. The organizational plan brings the organizational administration in contact with the program services because the organizational administration supports the program services. And then there's the sweet spot in the middle where the program is reaching its target population and the program is supported by the sound organizational structure, and that's where we see effective service delivery. So to really start to paint out what's happening here, I want you to take a little look at this process diagram. We have 3 levels. We have our target population, we have our service arena, and we have our program. Our target population is, we've specified already, those are the people we're trying to reach and to help. The program we've specified is the social intervention. The service arena is where these two meet. This is where those interactions or transactions I was talking about come into play. So if you move to the right, it sets the stage. You have your service utilization plan that is ensuring that our target population will be brought into contact with the program. And then you have your organizational plan, where you're assured that the organization is supporting the delivery of the program. And in between, like I said, the program and the target population, that they engage in service transactions. The program is offering, the target population is receiving, and sometimes if the program is looking to revise itself, there may be a small amount where the target population is also giving back to the program. These transactions occur sequentially within that service arena over time, over likely multiple contacts, and eventually the exchanges are complete, and we will start to see both those short-term, the proximal outcomes, or those long-term outcomes, the distal outcomes. And those proximal and distal outcomes will support whether or not our impact theory, our theory of change, was effective. When all the ingredients combine into the service delivery of the program, the goal is to result in those short-term and long-term outcomes. So now that we've focused on our understanding of what program theory is and what components combine to form it, we need to know how to determine or find the program theory to be assessed. I want to just spend a quick moment on Dr. Carol Weiss. She was an American scholar within the area of education, policy analysis, sociology, and evaluation. And she made substantial contributions to the theoretical grounding of evaluation work in the late 1970s through the 1980s and the 1990s. She pushed not only for an understanding of that cause and effect or the intervention and outcome process, but also stressed the importance of understanding what mechanisms are at work to get from point A to point B. Why is it happening? She argued that evaluation was a social science, and it could and it should look to its related fields for theories that could help unpack what was happening in those in-between spaces from point A and point B. One of her many contributions surrounded how to elicit or determine a program's theory. The term articulated program theory is attributed to her, which refers to a program's theory that is spelled out in program documents and well understood by staff and stakeholders. In this case, considerable thought has already been given to specifying the program's underlying assumptions, processes, and concepts. Conversely, when the underlying assumptions about how program services and practices are presumed to accomplish their purposes have not been fully articulated and recorded, the program has what's called implicit program theory, or as Weiss called it, a tacit theory. Implicit program theory will take more work on the evaluator's part, as they will need to identify, extract, and articulate it before getting down to the business of analyzing or assessing it. So sometimes you get lucky. Sometimes the program documentation that exists and the stakeholders have already spent time crafting what the program theory is. Many times it's going to live in a gray area. It's not concretely or explicitly constructed or specified or communicated anywhere. Remember, the evaluator's role here is not to create what they think the program theory should be, but rather find the underlying theory as it was intended to be in consultation or reflecting the decision makers and the stakeholders. It will reflect their conceptualization of what the program is meant to do and what the anticipated results are to come from it. One way to tackle eliciting or deriving or finding an implicit program theory is to define the boundaries of the program at issue. Since there is rarely, if ever, going to be only one correct definition of a program, a sound strategy is often to consult with or take on the perspective of the decision makers who are expected to act on the findings of the evaluation. They will likely be able to articulate what the program's purpose is and how the program is supposed to act, and ultimately what they expect to see in the outcomes. While the decision makers may be a strong source for teasing out the program's theory, consulting other high priority stakeholders is encouraged. Ultimately, you want an accurate, well-rounded program theory, but also one that has boundaries. The scope should be broad enough that it serves the intended purpose, but limited enough that it doesn't overextend resources for no reason or overshadow or go beyond the expected return on the investments. Within the derived definition, the important activities, events, and resources that are linked to the anticipated outcomes should be included. You can identify this by reverse engineering the process, starting by looking at the benefits of that the program anticipates, and then working backwards to identify and map the activities and resources that are meant to bring about the benefit. If you remember, we were talking about how every tactic, every strategy, every method of program delivery should be intentional. It should be intentional to bringing about the intended change in the social condition. So, if you've received a program or you're reviewing a program and you're trying to elicit the program theory, they might not say that we're offering this because it will impact this other thing. But they might say, we expect to see these changes, and here's what we're going to do to bring them about. If you start to piecemeal those apart and track them backwards, you can probably start to map those activities and those resources and connect the dots for yourself to be able to see more explicitly what the program designers and the stakeholders were visualizing and how they maybe more ambiguously on their side expected the actions and interactions to lead to the change. Sometimes the program is so new or so yet undeveloped that the evaluator can assist in creating the program theory that will guide it. If this is the case, it can be pretty explicit from the beginning. But other times, you need to look within the existing program structure and draw out the actions and assumptions. This may be an iterative process, also known as successive approximation, where the evaluator drafts definitions, receives feedback from the stakeholder, revises the definitions based on that feedback, resubmits it to the stakeholder representatives, receives more feedback, and so on until there's an agreement that the definition is a strong representation of the theory. This process works well for both process theory and impact theory. As an evaluator attempting to explicate the program theory in this manner, you can look at primary documents such as supporting documentation for the program, interviews with stakeholders and other subject matter experts. You can gather information from site visits and opportunities to actually observe the program. You can also gather information sometimes from the wide body of social science literature that exists. What you have available to you may depend greatly on whether or not the program is new or whether it has been fully developed and operational and possibly even evaluated before. So, what kind of information do you need to target to arrive at a strong program theory? Perhaps the most important matter to be determined from the program sources relates to the goals and objectives of the program, which are necessarily an integral part of the program theory, especially impact theory. The goals and objectives that must be represented in program theory, however, are not necessarily the same as those identified in a program's mission statement or in responses to questions asked of stakeholders. At the end of the day, when isolating program theory, the aim is that there must be a reasonable belief that implementing the program can actually obtain the intended objectives. This should be concrete, definable, and empirically measurable. Goals and objectives that are related to changes that the program seeks to bring about are related to impact theory. Those that are related to service delivery and program activities are more related to process theory, including organizational theory, or the organizational plan and the service utilization plan. To properly describe the program process theory, the evaluator must identify each distinct program component, its functions, and the particular activities and operations associated with those functions. A critical aspect of program theory is how the various expected outcomes and functions relate to each other. Some key program functions, including assessing client need, completing the intake process, assigning case managers, or the like. They are the agreed upon steps that are part of the program delivery. They are heavily connected to the activities and the job descriptions of the various persons involved in the program delivery. Once these functions are established and defined, they need to be organized. Often, this is in a temporal order where the next activity is reliant on a previous function being fulfilled. For example, an educational program needs to create a curriculum before training facilitators to deliver the program. Visual aids can be hugely beneficial for organizing and communicating this logical order. And again, this is where the logic model can come into play, laying out the cause and effect process while placing the interventions, activities, resources, and other contributing factors within the process. The description of program theory that results from the procedures described will generally represent the program as it was intended more than it actually is. Program managers and policymakers think of the idealized program as the real one, with various shortfalls from that ideal as glitches that do not represent what the program is really about. This is the distance between theory and reality. Something can be technically perfect on paper, but as we know, when you're working with humans in the field, things often don't go exactly as planned. Does this mean that it's automatically a failed initiative? Absolutely not. Some discrepancy between the ideal and the real is expected. Evaluators even have a separate type of evaluation to deal with this, but that's another talk for another day down the road. When developing a program theory, the definition should be clear, agreed upon by all stakeholders as best as possible, and understood by all involved. If there's confusion, there may be ambiguity. Remember, also, agreement indicates that you've found the shared understanding of how the program is supposed to work. It doesn't always mean that it is a good theory, though. You need to assess that theory itself. As the evaluator, you're looking for the theory foundations to clearly and comprehensively spec out what the program is intended to do and how it is meant to do it. This gives you avenues to analyze and measure the outcomes working from a shared and clearly defined conceptualization as a program, of the program. So like I just mentioned, you can derive the theory, but you need to assess the theory. Once you've actually reach that level of agreement on what the program theory is doesn't mean that it's automatically acceptable and ready to be acted upon. So perhaps unsurprising at this point, but evaluators love to evaluate. So even when there seems to be a sound underlying program theory, they still want to at least informally assess the strength of that program theory. One way to do this is to critique the theory and its relation to the social needs that the program is supposed to target. A program theory that does not relate in an appropriate manner to the actual nature and circumstances of the social conditions that are the issue will result in an ineffective program no matter how well the program is implemented and administered. It is fundamental, then, to assess program theory in relationship to the needs of the target population the program is intended to serve. Many of you will probably be familiar with the terms validity and specificity. We'll cover these concepts more clearly later in the course when we actually get into methodological considerations. But in a nutshell for today, validity is concerned with asking, are we measuring what we intend to measure? When assessing a program theory, validity can be increased by collaboration with experts and stakeholders to ensure that the theory reflects what everyone conceptualizes as accurate. So when you get everybody on the same page with the definition, you're essentially saying that we are all agreeing that we are describing what we are meaning to describe, or if that makes sense. The more detailed the definitions and conceptualizations are, and the more accurately it will reflect the characteristics of the identified problem, the better the program theory is. So you've heard me say it last week. You will hear me say it this week. You will hear me say it throughout the course, but you need to drill down into the details. Remember we said the idea of what poverty is sounds so common sense, but when you actually think about it, not everybody may have the exact same definition of what poverty is. The same holds true for any concepts that go into your program's theory, its process theory, its impact theory. You need to operationalize and conceptualize and define everything. It's one of those situations where more is better. Not because you want to have people get lost in the weeds, but because you want to leave as little room for ambiguity as possible. So connecting the dots back here, that's just, before we move on from this slide, connect everything back together. Since program impact theory is concerned with the causal relationship between program services and outcomes, these outcomes are meant to align directly with the specified needs. So we're concerned with the connection between the program, the effect it has on social conditions, and whether this will meet the needs to improve the conditions. So I want to kind of take a look at where we are so far. Last week we talked about needs assessments, which in a very streamlined nutshell identifies the social needs that a program could probably target. That needs assessment can inform the program theory and the process theory. That's why these are both green, because they're two types of, or two domains of evaluation, and the needs assessment, if done in an ideal world before a program is launched, will inform that program theory. That program theory, if you drop down, will direct the delivered program services. Those program services will create program outcomes. Those program outcomes will impact those social conditions. And the changes in the social conditions should meet those identified social needs. So far we're asking the question, do the program's assumptions and delivery ultimately change the targeted social conditions to meet those identified needs? I hope that this helps you see how these evaluative processes and the detail work that you're doing within each is supporting the next step, which is supporting the next step, which essentially is aiming to create a strong space for the program to do what it's supposed to do, which is to impact outcomes, to change social conditions, to meet those social needs. Another avenue to keep in mind when assessing program theory is the assessment of logic and plausibility. A thorough job of articulating program theory should reveal the critical assumptions and expectations inherent in the program's design. One essential form of assessment is simply a critical review of the logic and plausibility of these aspects of the program theory. A panel of reviewers should be organized for that purpose. Such an expert review panel could include representatives from the program staff and other major stakeholders, as well as the evaluator. A second target for assessing the program theory is assessing the logic and plausibility of the theory. Here we aim to find out if the logic holds under scrutiny and also whether it's realistic. We're examining the assumption and expectations that are embedded in the theory to assess accuracy, feasibility, specificity, etc. Here, your stakeholders should be involved as internal views balanced with external objectivity allow for a balance between understanding the nuances at the local level with the broader objectivity that is needed. Here you want to question key aspects of a program theory to ensure that it makes sense and is achievable. You might want to critically examine the definition of program goals and objectives. Ambiguity at this most fundamental stage can lead to significant departure from the implementation and can confound potential results and outcomes. Goals and objectives should be action-oriented, measurable, and precisely state what is being targeted. For example, increasing knowledge, changing attitudes towards X, reducing the number of Y, etc. You want to realistically assess the feasibility. Is it a realistic goal or objective? Are the expectations for what constitutes change or success too high? Are the changes within the scope or influence of the program, or are they too grand? We might want to eliminate homelessness in our community, but our organization may only be positioned to offer alternative housing options like low barrier shelters. Clearly, homelessness is far more complex than that one solution can address. So our program needs to center on what we can do and avoid being overly grandiose. Perhaps down the road, we can liaise with another organization and collaborate to target another facet of homelessness. But at this time, your program theory needs to reflect what could actually feasibly take place. You'll want to also look at the change process that is put forward by the program theory. It needs to be plausible and it needs to be sound. The cause and effect relationship has to make sense. Each step in the cause and effect chain of events and interactions should be reasonable to believe can and will occur. So if it's so complex or if it's so precarious or delicate that it's unlikely that this cause and effect chain reaction is going to happen, we may need to assess whether that is a good component of our program theory or whether it needs to be revised, clarified, and possibly toned down a bit. You'll want to also examine whether there's clear definitions for how the program will first identify members of the target population. So how will you recruit people? And then how it will deliver and sustain its services. If the program can't reach the target population, it really doesn't stand much chance of being effective. You'll also probably want to look at the activities and procedures and key components of the program and make sure that they are defined, again, with a level of specificity. So they're so specifically defined to allow for the orderly rollout of the program. Each piece of the program should have thoughtful and adequate support and resources, or else it's just words. So you got to back the plans. More recently, a drill-down approach to the review of logic models, for example, program impact theory, which involves revising the logic models after gathering information about how the program actually operates on the ground, is a fairly new initiative or viewpoint, tactic, approach. This way, each output can have a submodel developed to ensure that each component has a well-defined set of steps and processes. So again, you're breaking things down to the smallest level and you're explaining how it's supposed to work, how you're going to ensure that it is situated with the supports and resources it needs to be able to work. And finally, for a program to function as it's intended, it needs to have adequate resources available throughout its delivery model. People, money, materials, equipment, relationships, etc. Those can't just be set up at the beginning. There needs to be consistent availability of these resources so that a program is well supported from start to finish. Another approach to assessing program theory is to consult and compare with research and practice. Some information applicable to assessing the various components of program theory is likely to exist in the social sciences and human sciences research literature. A lot of times we're not recreating the wheel from nothing. There's something out there that can help. This is because someone somewhere has often already tackled similar issues, and especially valuable is it if it's with a similar target population on key characteristics. And these key characteristics often are matching on socioeconomic considerations such as cultural relevance, geographic concentration of the group, or psychosocial details such as motivation to change. Program theory often runs on the if-then assumptions. You've heard me say that earlier today. If there is an increase in the number of mental health professionals on staff, then it strengthens mental health support services for program participants. If there is an increase in funding for vocational training, then we can expand the range of skills development courses offered to beneficiaries. You can see this interplay between resources and that organizational plan and how it can support the program delivery and the service utilization plan. By looking at these types of connections for a program, we can also start to consult research on outcomes related to these if-thens. This can be helpful when you don't have or you can't find very many outcome studies for a specific program or one very similar to yours. Sometimes you need to look at those if-then relationships, break down the program into that underlying logic, and then you might be able to creatively find some more research that targeted those pieces, even if it was in a slightly different substantive field. Yet another approach for assessing program theory can come from preliminary observation. Program theory, of course, is inherently conceptual and it cannot be observed directly. You can't just walk out and observe program theory. Nevertheless, it involves many assumptions about how things are supposed to work that an evaluator can assess by observing the program in operation, talking to staff and service recipients, and making other such inquiries focused specifically on the program's theory. A best practice for assessing your program theory is to get out of the office and try to see it in action. Speak to those facilitating and those attending. See how it's playing out in the real world. You'll be able to see where the program is aligning with the program theory and where there is deviation or disconnect from that intended program theory. You'll also be able to see areas where the theory and the organizational plan may have been too ambitious and is actually unrealistic in practice. Remembering the scope of what you're assessing here is important. If you start to assess how well the program is aligning to its intentions, how well the implementation is going, then you're getting into other types of evaluations, which we're going to discuss later in the course. For the purpose of assessing the program theory, you are aiming to simply see whether the program's intentions, processes, and goals are realistic. We're not interested at this point in how well the program is going. We're interested in whether we've set up something that actually has a shot of succeeding. If not, then some fine-tuning is needed, which is better done before the program is fully launched. In some cases, this is where a pilot project could be helpful. Okay, so you've derived your program theory, you've elicited it. Now, potentially, you've assessed it. So what kind of outcomes might you see? It can't be stressed enough on just how important a good program theory is. Between the theory of change, including the cause and effect logic, combined with the organizational plan of how to execute the program and the service utilization plan related to how the program will engage the target population, the program theory also sets the program up for success or failure, and also positions it to be evaluated once it's launched to determine how well it performs on several measures. If the program theory is weak, frankly, the program is not ready to be evaluated on any further level. You need to fix the foundation before you build upon it. Makes sense, right? Sometimes you'll find concerns with the program theory. Key operational steps or resources may be lacking, or it's just not the right fit. When assessment of a program theory reveals deficiencies, one appropriate response is for the responsible parties to redesign the program. Such program reconceptualization may include 1. Clarifying goals and objectives. 2. Restructuring the program components for which the intended activities are not happening, needed, or reasonable. And 3. Working with stakeholders to obtain consensus about the logic that connects the program activities with the desired outcome. The evaluator's job after identifying weaknesses is to guide or facilitate the revisions. The evaluator brings a long-sighted vision to the project, recognizing that this crucial phase of program development will inform the questions that will inevitably be asked down the road. Whether the program succeeded, for example, is only a fair question to answer if the program was set up to have a chance to succeed, and if we articulated from the beginning what success would look like, how it would be measured, and the cause and effect actions that would bring it about. This is the systematic nature of the evaluator's role. If there is no adequate specification of the program impact theory, an impact evaluation may be able to determine whether certain outcomes were produced, and we'll talk about impact evaluations further in the course, but it will be difficult to explain why, or often more important, why not certain outcomes were produced. Poorly specified impact theory limits the ability to identify or measure the intervening variables on which the outcomes may depend, and correspondingly, the ability to explain what went right or what went wrong in producing those outcomes. If program process theory is also poorly specified, it will not even be possible to adequately describe the nature of the program that produced or failed to produce the outcomes of interest. So you can see the impact theory, the program theory, the processes theory. These are foundational elements that if they're not clear as can be from the beginning and actionable and measurable, then down the road you're going to pay for it because you won't be able to tease apart what you're seeing. You might be able to measure an outcome. You won't be able to interpret what that means, whether it, what contributed to it, what the strengths were, what the weaknesses were. Evaluations under these circumstances are often referred to as black box evaluations, and it indicates that the assessment of outcomes is made without much insight into what's causing those outcomes. Because the cause and effect dichotomies were not specified concretely from the beginning, it's nearly impossible to explain why the outcomes occurred. We might be able to say that sexual assaults decreased during the duration of a program and are likely attributable to the program, but we wouldn't be able to tell you what parts of the program succeeded or what parts did not have much impact. So I can't stress enough, having that sound program theory there's no substitute for it. So taking the time to assess that program theory, to make sure that it is strong, to make sure that it is nuanced and detailed, to make sure that it reflects your stakeholder definitions, and to make sure that it's reflecting reality, among other things, it's pivotal because it's setting you up for the rest of your evaluation process, and it's setting you up to be able to answer those questions that your stakeholders are probably going to want answers to down the road. If a program fails, they're going to be asking why. If a program succeeds, they're going to be asking potentially what were the strongest elements. And if we didn't specify these details this early on in the process, you can't recover from that. You won't be able to answer those. So, if you take one major thing away from me talking for this time period tonight, it's that you want to not overlook the value of that program theory. That the stronger it is, the easier your job's going to be down the road, and the more likely it will be that you are set up for success as the evaluator as the program rolls out and as these questions start to arise. And that's it for week 3. So I'll see you next week. And during that time, I will have been working on marking your first application assignments. And next week, you will get a new one. But for this week, only prepare for next week's reading, for next week's lecture. Thank you so much. See you next week.